I'm Nancy Lyons-Stadler with WSP. Other members of our team on the call today are Brian Robinson, who is leading the urban design component of the project, Nora Anderson, who is working on the transportation focused pieces, and Steve Gage is also with us today. He's part of our civil team, lending expertise in that area, and Peter Lawson-Jones is on the call. I think most of you probably know him. He is supporting the engagement initiatives, and I don't think I've missed anybody as far as that goes. All right. And everybody can see my screen, right, that I'm sharing? All right, perfect. This is the outline of what we're going to cover today. We'll go through the project purpose, a quick review of what we learned from the first phase of outreach. And then we're going to get into the concept development components, going through some ideas for what could be integrated into the corridor, and then review of potential corridor themes. All of this is built from the input that we received from the community engagement during the first phase of the project. And given the number of people that we have in attendance, the breakout groups will just be discussing the themes together, and then we'll go through the next steps for the project. So the overall purpose of the project is to reimagine the Lee Road corridor from Van Aken by City Hall and the police station south into the first 3 blocks of the city of Cleveland to allow the concepts to be integrated with what's going on with the city of Cleveland as well. The idea is to create a commercial district on Lee Road that is commercially vibrant, aesthetically attractive, equitable, sustainable, safe, connected, and accessible to all. And as part of the development process, we want to make sure that we develop the district in a way that successfully integrates transportation, land use, economic development, and community engagement.
And before we move on and share concepts with you, we want to remind you where we are in the process. We started this process with the community back in February in phase 1. I mentioned visioning. We've been focusing on understanding the community's thoughts on Lee Road as it is today and what you want it to become. That was February to May. Today in June, we are now in phase 2, launching it in mid-June, June 15th today. And in June and through July, we'll be listening to additional community feedback on new concepts that will be presented to you in a moment. Then we'll take all of that additional feedback, and our consulting team will come back, prepare a draft plan that will be presented back to the public this fall. So we're excited to be in phase 2 today. Next slide, please, Kara. Within each of those phases, we are having multiple meetings, stakeholder committee, business focus group, public meetings, and lots of informal engagement. What you see on your screen is what has happened to date, and we were very excited to have more than 2,000 people participating throughout phase 1 in all different ways. And so we'll give you a little bit of short background on what we heard in phase 1. So in that visioning phase 1, we asked folks to tell us what they think the challenges and opportunities are on Lee Road. You see right in front of you on the screen some of the challenges we heard repeated from multiple people, continuing to tell us the traffic and roadway problems, parking and safety concerns, and really seeing a lack of family-friendly businesses. But on the flip side, you shared your opportunities for transformation. You can see a long list here. I won't read them out loud. I'll let you run through them. But we certainly had a lot of visioning around what really great opportunities there could be to preserve existing businesses, preserve the trees, create a welcoming, safe community, building on what we have today and improving it through additional community spaces, connections to the existing Shelton Park, and creating more gathering spaces. The next slide gives you a word cloud of the kinds of things that we heard. The larger the word, the more people said it. So here are just some examples of what we really would like Lee Road to become. And so next, our consulting team is going to present concepts based on this direction that we heard from you.
Thanks, Laura. First, we're going to go through a variety of corridor elements, the pieces, the puzzle pieces that we can fit into the corridor in various configurations and opportunities. And then we'll go through the 3 different corridor themes that we developed based on those concepts.
So as Nancy was saying, hopefully everybody can hear me. As Nancy was saying, I want to be clear that the kind of three concepts that we want to show you all today are reflective of what we heard during the engagement process. They're not our ideas. We're not married to any one of the three specific ideas. And the intention is that we want to prod you and we want you to tell us what you like, what you don't like. We want to find common ground. That's kind of the purpose of doing this in the planning world. Each of those ideas, those themes, as we call them, we're not calling them options, we're calling them themes, are made up of a different set of elements. And those are sort of all the elements of the built environment. One of those is land use. When we use that word, we're talking about what are the activities that are occurring on those sites? So as we think about that, or is it restaurants? Is it more retailing, right? Active storefronts where people are walking by. Are they buying things? Are they sitting outside? Is it bars? Is it breweries, right? What are the types of retail uses we're interested in? Or is it outdoor spaces? Is that going to be a civic plaza, hardscape, or more park, right? Is it more housing? Is it more maker spaces or sort of play creative type spaces? Or is it office, right? Those are some of the examples of land use. And so we heard all this, and you should see these things reflected in all three of the kind of themes. So go ahead to the next slide, Nancy. Public realm treatments. When we use the word public realm, we're talking about what happens in the street spaces, right? What happens on the park spaces. It's all the space that isn't land use, right? So, the sidewalks, the seating elements, public art, lighting, it's all the pieces and parts that make up the kind of environment that you can see here. And again, these are some examples of things that we heard through the engagement process. And then we talk about community elements, right? And when we really talk about that, we're talking about things like gateways, like Short North right here, just an example. Are there elements or pieces that can reflect the identity of the community and the neighborhood and the area, right? Is it Shelton Park? That's clearly a central community feature. What are all the pieces and what are all the pieces and components of Shelton Park that we want to consider in terms of expansion or reduction, right? What do we want to do with Shelton Park, right? And then we're going to talk a lot about community connections. Commercial districts and these sort of districts are really codependent on the neighborhoods, right? You really need both to be thriving in order to be successful. So do we want to connect better to the town center, connect better to the city of Cleveland, connect better to Lowman or Moreland, or do we want to do it all, right? So we sort of need to figure out where the right places we want to connect are. So think about that when you see these themes.
A big part of the plan is reconfiguration of Lee Road from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. This will help improve left turning access, and it will make the corridor operate more safely. The city very recently completed a traffic study to understand the capacity, operations, and will this work moving forward with today's current traffic volumes and what's expected for tomorrow. And the results of the traffic study show that it will work. It will provide basically the same operational capacity at the signalized intersections as what's there today. There are 2 varieties of configuration. There's the striped center turn lane, and then there's the median section. The striped center turn lane provides unlimited access to the driveways along the corridor. The median sections provide some visual relief. They also make it a little bit easier to get across the street at intersections. The bicycle treatment alternatives, there's a variety that are shown here. The intent is to provide bicycle infrastructure that accommodates all ages and abilities. In the upper left, you see an off-road trail. This is the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. So it's at the sidewalk level, functions like a trail. And in the lower left, you see in-road separated one-way bike lanes. They're like standard bike lanes, but as you can see, there's a raised section that physically separates the bike lane from the travel lane. In the upper right, it basically combines those two into a cycle track. So it's 2-way bicycle traffic on one side of the street, also with a physical separation between the vehicles that are traveling on the roadway and the bicycle travel path. And then in the lower right, you see a buffered bike lane. So there's physical separation. There just isn't a physical barrier between the bicycle traffic and the vehicular traffic. Another thing that we want to consider is parking. For a commercially vibrant district, we need to make sure that there's a good supply of parking and that it's in the right places. There's a variety of ways to accomplish that. In the upper left, you see on-street parking. In the lower left, you see a shared parking structure. In the upper right, there is a shared surface parking lot. And then what we have for most of the corridor in the existing condition today are individual properties with the individual parking on those properties. There may be some opportunities to share the parking between those individual property owners if there's agreement among the owners. Another potential treatment for the corridor are curb extensions or bump outs. It can be used to help control and calm traffic at intersections, as you see in the upper left. It can be used to shadow parking, which helps to shorten the pedestrian crossing distance. It helps to define the corridor, and it also helps to calm traffic. And then in the right, you see where there's a curb extension provided that helps to shorten the pedestrian crossing distance, making it safer for pedestrians to get across the street. And then as we look specifically at pedestrian crossings, there's a number of ways that we have shown here to help ease the pedestrian's job of getting across the street, making it feel safer, more comfortable. A lot of them show separation and the provision of a refuge area in between the traveled lanes, which would be easy to accomplish with the reconfiguration to the 3-lane section. And finally, another roadway treatment consideration is at the Chagrin-Lee-Kenyon intersection. You can see on the left as it is today with the Kenyon leg feeding into the signalized intersection. In the middle, you can see the proposed condition where that Kenyon leg would be closed. That would make it more safe and comfortable for pedestrians. See that the angle of the intersection reduces the amount of paved area, it reduces the pedestrian crossing distance. It will also improve operational capacity at that intersection because the green time that's currently provided to the low volume of traffic on Kenyon would be redistributed to the east-west traffic and the north-south traffic. And because of the configuration of the surrounding roadways, there are other ways to get in and out in terms of traffic circulation. And then the third potential configuration on the right shows where traffic would be permitted to enter at Kenyon, but it would not exit at Kenyon. So that retains some of the circulation, but it also provides the operational benefit where the exiting traffic from Kenyon is not, there's no exiting traffic going into the intersection. So we see the same signal operations improvements that we see with the full closure.
So I think it's important to reiterate that those elements and those pieces that we sort of just went through are all things, again, that we heard through the engagement process. We all think there are things that should be there, so they're considered in each of these different themes that we're going to show you today, right? So you'll see all that recurring. So moving into the sort of thematic approaches, we've sort of developed 3 different ways of looking at this corridor over the long term, and I just want to add three really quick caveats to this discussion. Number one is that this is a long-term plan. So when you're thinking about this thing, don't think about necessarily something's going to happen tomorrow immediately. I mean, there might be some near-term improvements that can occur and that will occur, but think about this as where we're going in, say, 10 to 15 years, right? Plans take a while, right? I think that's one caveat we want to add. The second caveat is that we want to sorry, just in terms of the economics and market side of things, we want, we've done market work, and our team member Chris has done some market work, and what you're going to see today isn't necessarily, they're all viable in the market. They're not necessarily going to be driven by the market to this level, but we think they're all possible in terms of what could occur. And so we sort of want you to keep that in mind as well. And I think the third real thing is we're going to show you some sort of plan drawings, right? And so keep in mind, just sort of my advice, no plan ever ends up looking exactly like it's drawn. Plans are organic and they evolve over time. And I just sort of keep in mind, as the business groups and everyone who's vested in this project keeps going, these plans will change incrementally, right? And they should, because the voice of the community sort of is integrated into that implementation. So just keep that in mind as you see these. So here are the 3 thematic elements or thematic approaches that we have for the corridor. One's the modern Main Street, one is sort of the neighborhood center strategy, and one of them is a density-driven transformation approach. And so we're going to run through these pretty quickly, and then I think we're going to have a discussion, right? Nancy, do we want to stop and pause at each of these, or do we want to just go through them all?
I think if we give the overview and then we can go back and discuss them.
Sounds good. Okay. So the modern Main Street. So think of your kind of traditional classic walkable Main Street in a downtown, right? I believe the example of this for me would be like Belleville, Illinois. You might not know that one, but it's essentially a 1 to 2 story tall commercial retailing zone, very intimate in scale, you know, street parking, branding and signage, really the idea of creating that small scale, intimate, walkable commercial district. That's one real strategy, right? Go ahead to the next slide, Nancy. Just to kind of take a look at this, and hopefully you can see my mouse on here. Basically we're sort of looking from Lowman to Scottsdale. If you see all the red in there, we're essentially saying, look within that zone and develop an infill with smaller commercial buildings, right, where possible. Maybe some of those are redeveloped. Maybe some developments occur in front of the existing buildings, but the idea is to slowly build that out with a 1 to 2 story area, adding outdoor plazas and retailing areas, right, and outdoor dining zones and other elements, so that we kind of can get to that 1 to 2 story walkable zone of mostly commercial type uses, mostly active retailing type uses, right? If you can see Chilton Park in the center of the green piece, we want to expand that. We want to pull it out to Lee Road and give it a front, right? Give it a proper front and an entrance as a park, and give it some presence on Lee Road. And then down at Lowman and down at Scottsdale, we're saying maybe we integrate a little bit taller 1 to 2 story or 2 to 3 story tall mixed use gateways. And that's essentially just a little bit denser buildings where we have maybe ground floor retailing and residential on the above. And we're saying we're going to build that out. We're going to have some physical elements that cross the roadway, or some type of branding and art that creates an entrance into that Main Street concept. So if you see the red and there's the orange on both ends, that's the real idea on that one, is to create that classic kind of walkable Main Street approach. And that's one way to think about this corridor. I want to reiterate that we're not married to these ideas. We're trying to give you 3 different ways of thinking about the future of the corridor. That's one way of thinking about it. Just to give you a little bit in the details, you'll kind of get this in the next, it'll be clearer in the next 2. You can sort of see here, there's essentially a center turn lane that can be used as a median, right, where possible. It can have pedestrian refuge crossings, which Nancy showed you. There's going to be 2 travel lanes. In this version, we sort of want to integrate on-street parking. If we're going to really rethink, you know, the parking in front of these buildings, we need to give you parking, right? So the idea there is that this version would integrate on-street parking. There wouldn't be any bike facilities on this version, right? We'd have to find an off-network bike route and figure out where to connect bikes east-west across the district. You can see the little zigzags. We're suggesting to maybe expand that concept of the lighting that's already there today, kind of down the district. We can do, if you see where the curbs sort of come out there at the intersection where you see the crossings, we do curb extensions that really sort of tighten up the intersections and shorten the crossings. And we do a whole bunch of other variety of little elements that might be a little bit hard to see in this diagram. Nancy, go ahead to the next slide. Just to give you a sense of the scale of that. So we're really talking about building up to that 1 to 2 story tall, right? Slowly, incrementally filling out that Main Street concept over time, right? That's one way of thinking about it. The second way is really the idea of sort of the neighborhood center. And the name of the place is slipping my mind here locally. We have some examples that we could talk through later. But this idea is to really use and leverage the bus garage as sort of a central area to redevelop, to create a very small core of mixed use, which has a lot of neighborhood services and other types of amenities, right? Outdoor retailing, dining, and activity center. Maybe there's a food truck lot. Maybe there's additional public parking. We can use that site to create new connections into that neighborhood center to create really sort of a core and heart of the community. Go ahead to the next slide, Nancy. And this version, you can kind of see it looks a little bit different. So if you can see the bus garage site is redeveloped basically from Hampstead down to Nicholas. We're saying somewhere in there, we're saying that's really where we're going to create that core of mixed use development. Maybe it's 3 to 4 stories tall. We're trying to get ground floor retailing that has like neighborhood focused services, like laundries might not be the best example, but think of things that you need on a daily basis, right? We're trying to create that sense of what the neighbors need and how do we integrate that fully into the district, right? In this case, we do maybe a slightly smaller expansion to Chelton Park and give a small connection out onto Lee Road with a new connection east into excuse me, east into the Lowmond area. So we're basically creating a new east-west connection so the neighborhood can kind of filter into that core. We create sort of end caps right there around Hampstead and Nicholas. And then sort of all the additional public improvements that sort of create that sense of I've arrived at like the neighborhood core, right? That's sort of the idea on that one. So it's a little bit smaller scale in the center, right? But leverages that opportunity of the bus site. Sort of on the north side, we're saying, okay, maybe that there's some additional expanded civic and recreational type uses to be added into there, right? That has a little bit different character. So this one, rather than creating one sort of cohesive district, we're saying maybe there's a core that has a certain character. Maybe there's a little bit different character on the north. And then on the south, in the south area, we're saying we just sort of look at the kind of existing commercial, we sort of expand that and we build that sort of as its own kind of area. So in some ways, we're saying maybe there's 3 distinct little areas kind of in this version, right? I think another important thing, and you'll see it a little bit better on the next slide, Nancy, is that this version we're saying, and if you can see the bright green thing that's on the bottom of the drawing there, we're saying on the west side of the street, we want to integrate essentially a wider shared use path concept. That's essentially a 10-foot wide bike pedestrian sort of zone where we're going to kind of build out the curb in a slightly different way. And we're going to allow the trail to go all the way there, all the way down to the transit station, right? That's a different kind of facilities. If you can see, we still have the 3-lane configuration on that one, right? Center turn lane with the median branding, all the same sort of approach there. But in this one, we don't have street parking. So in some ways, we're saying, okay, maybe we could trade off street parking for a shared use path in this version. A lot of the similar elements of the streetscape kind of mixed in different ways. But this version, if you're building out the path, there's probably a lot of opportunity for greenery on that one because you have a lot of additional space related to that trail. So in some kind of ways, we can integrate a lot more landscaping. And just to give you a sense of what the typical cross-section would be like through the town center, that would be, we'd want to get a little more height there, right? We'd want to create more of a bit of a splash there in the center where we could. So that's sort of a second way of really thinking about the district. Let's go on to the next one. And then the third one, we heard this one, the group that I was in, I know mentioned this a few times, kept saying, mixed use, high density. They said that a number of times. And so this one's a bit bigger and bolder vision. And so this is the idea of sort of really looking at the long term. How do we get some really significant scale development? We're really, instead of saying this is going to be a core specifically for the neighborhood, we're saying, hey, this is going to pull in a lot of people from outside of the district, right? This can be more of a destination, big scale thing, and that's a 5-story tall. I mean, think much bigger, right? A whole mix of different types of uses. In the neighborhood center, the main street, maybe those environments are conducive to one type of retailing, where in this one, maybe there's a whole bunch of other types of uses. Maybe there's a lot more potential for office in this version, right? Or maker spaces, or completely different types of ancillary uses that you couldn't have before, right? We're bringing a whole lot of new people into this district, right? Go ahead and jump to the next slide. And you'll see this one's got a lot more orange in it, right? So the scale of this one could be bigger. Maybe there's some logic and closer to the station, maybe this makes more sense, right? That getting 5-story tall ground floor retailing with residential. We're bringing a lot of new residents into this version as well, you'll see. So a lot of these could be residential above, right? The idea with this too, as you can see the sort of darker blocks. Well, in those situations, maybe we're able to integrate structured parking behind, right? It can be shared for the public as needed to go to Chelton Park as an example. We expand Chelton Park a bit as well in this version. Maybe we create a hardscaped area that connects out, again, a new connection to the west. And this one involves a couple different new street connections. You can see sort of on sort of left of the drawing. Thank you for pointing that out, Nancy. And then sort of on the top side of the drawing. So if we're going to redevelop at this scale, we need to really sort of connect the neighborhood east and west better to the extent possible, right? So that's a really different way of thinking about it. And let's jump to the next slide. And in this version, the structure of the roads, again, a little bit different, you know, it's just sort of align with that. But you can see the sort of grain that we have on sort of the top and bottom of that drawing. We're saying in this version, maybe we're able to do on-street bike lanes, essentially the green bike lanes that are sort of dedicated to bikes. A lot of the similar elements that you can see, again, the 3-lane cross section here is similar in all 3 of these, and a lot of spaces for amenities and seating and other types of elements associated with that. And just jump to the yep. And this, again, to give you a sense of the scale on that one. That one's going to be a bigger scale, right? So we really want to make some concerted effort to get development in this one. And that's a different way of thinking about this district.